Have you ever wished to become someone who feels completely unshakable? A person who is not disturbed by criticism, rejection, loss, or even betrayal. Have you ever imagined a moment where you finally stop carrying that quiet inner pain, that heaviness that lingers inside even when you act like everything is fine on the outside? Maybe you are exhausted from constantly trying to satisfy everyone, from maintaining a version of yourself that always looks strong, even when deep down all you truly want is rest. Just a short pause from the pressure of having to appear untouchable at all times. But there is something that most people are never told. As long as you keep avoiding pain, it keeps controlling you. As long as you try to shut it down, numb it, or hide from it, you remain tied to it. You stay influenced by the very things you are trying to escape. Words that hurt you, actions that disappoint you, and silences that feel unbearable inside. This is not a sign of weakness. It is simply how most human minds function. Many people just become better at pretending than others. Carl Jung, one of the most influential figures in psychology, suggested that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to become in response. The real shift begins there. It is not about building emotional armor or becoming cold and distant. It is about integration. It is about bringing into awareness everything that currently lives in the shadows of your mind. Because real strength is not the absence of pain, but the ability to remain conscious of yourself even while you are hurting. If you are still here, it is not random. This message might be for you, especially if you feel tired of being affected by everything and everyone around you. If you feel like others somehow hold emotional power over you that you cannot explain. There is a way out of this pattern, but it requires facing truths that may feel uncomfortable at first. And paradoxically, that discomfort is often what leads to freedom. You may believe that what hurts you comes from outside, from people's actions, their words, their abandonment or betrayal. But the deeper truth is more complex and far more uncomfortable. None of these external events can truly harm you unless something inside you is already open, sensitive, or unhealed. What hurts is not only what people do, but what those experiences activate within you. It is the meaning you assign. It is the internal story that gets triggered. It is the unresolved emotional material that was never processed properly. It is the inner emptiness that you often try to cover with confidence or pride. Jung pointed toward this idea when he explained that emotional pain from the external world is often a reflection of what has not yet been integrated within the inner world. This is why two people can go through the same situation and react completely differently. One might stay grounded, while the other collapses emotionally from something that seems small from the outside. It is not about the event itself, it is about where it lands inside you. And here is a difficult truth to accept. Much of your suffering continues because, at some level, you still believe you can control how life and people should treat you. You still try to be good enough, strong enough, intelligent enough, composed enough, as if reaching that state would somehow protect you from being hurt. But control is only an illusion. And the more tightly you hold on to it, the more tension you create inside yourself. You start living in constant anticipation, trying to predict outcomes that cannot be predicted, trying to prevent things that are part of life itself. If you want to reduce suffering, it does not come from increasing control. It comes from increasing awareness. Because as long as you believe the world must change for you to feel peace, you will remain emotionally dependent on external conditions. Your freedom begins the moment you realize that external events only affect you deeply when they find something similar already existing within you. This is where the real struggle takes place, inside the unconscious mind. What you do not see, what you refuse to acknowledge, and what you have not yet understood continues to influence you quietly in the background. And until it becomes conscious, it will keep directing your life while you call it fate or bad luck. The emotions that appear suddenly, the anger that feels out of nowhere, the sadness that arrives without warning, none of this is random. They are signals, messages coming from parts of you that have been ignored or pushed away for a long time. Jung described the unconscious as a living system made of memories, emotions, fears, and desires that have not been fully integrated. It does not disappear simply because you ignore it. Instead, it expresses itself in indirect ways. Repeated relationship patterns, emotional triggers, self-sabotage, anxiety, or sudden inner discomfort when everything seems fine on the surface. You may wonder why certain words affect you so deeply while others do not. It is because those words touch unresolved areas within you, places that still carry emotional charge. And if they still carry charge, it means they have not yet been healed or understood. Jung also emphasized that nothing truly changes until it is accepted. What is rejected or suppressed does not disappear. It becomes stronger in hidden forms. Yet many people continue to judge themselves, suppress emotions, and silence their inner experience, hoping it will somehow fix the problem. But avoidance does not resolve anything. It only pushes the issue deeper, where it continues to influence behavior without awareness. This is why emotional patterns repeat. This is why similar relationships appear again and again. This is why the same internal struggles return in different forms. It is not coincidence. It is repetition driven by what remains unconscious. And the more you try to protect yourself from emotional pain, the more sensitive you actually become to it. But there is another path. Not the path of defense, but the path of integration. Becoming emotionally strong does not mean becoming cold or detached. It does not mean pretending nothing affects you. It means understanding what you feel so deeply that you are no longer unconsciously controlled by it. Jung spoke about individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. Not the version shaped by expectations or social approval, but the authentic self that emerges when both light and shadow are acknowledged. Individuation is not about perfection, it is about wholeness. You do not need to become flawless, you need to become complete. And here is something most people never realize. The more you avoid pain, the more it follows you. The more you try not to feel, the more intensely you eventually do. But when you face your internal wounds, when you stop rejecting parts of yourself, something changes. External events lose their emotional grip over you. However, this requires courage. Not dramatic courage, but quiet honesty. The willingness to observe what is inside without running away from it. Many people are taught from a young age that pain is something to avoid, that sadness is weakness, that emotional sensitivity is a flaw. So they learn to escape. Distraction, denial, suppression. But pain does not vanish through avoidance. It transforms. It returns in different disguises. Restlessness, anxiety, anger, emptiness, or behaviors that feel hard to control. Unacknowledged pain always finds a way to express itself. Jung offered a very different perspective. He viewed suffering not as an enemy, but as a messenger, something that signals imbalance or unprocessed experience within the psyche. He suggested that when depression or emotional heaviness appears, it should not be immediately rejected but observed, as if it carries information. Not to glorify suffering, but to understand it. Because when you stop fighting your inner experience and start listening to it, something important shifts. Pain begins to lose its absolute control over you. And what once felt like something overwhelming starts becoming something understandable. This understanding does not remove all difficulty from life, but it changes your relationship with it. You are no longer constantly reacting. You begin to respond with awareness instead of impulse. And in that space, something new emerges. Emotional freedom that does not depend on external conditions. Much of this struggle exists because you are still in conflict with yourself. There is a part of you that wants to evolve, to grow, to move forward, and another part that wants everything to stay exactly as it is. Something within you is constantly calling for transformation, yet your ego, used to control and familiarity, tries to suppress that voice. And it is exactly within this internal friction that suffering is born. Because change is painful. Growth is painful. Releasing old beliefs, detaching from toxic connections, allowing outdated versions of yourself to fade away, all of it feels like a form of loss, like an inner mourning process, a symbolic death followed by rebirth. But it is precisely inside this space of collapse that something entirely new can emerge. When everything within you is dismantled, when your certainties fall apart, when pain exposes your vulnerability without filters, only then can you see yourself clearly. Without masks, without defense mechanisms, without performance. And at that exact point, suffering takes on a different meaning. It becomes almost sacred, because it forces you into a confrontation with yourself until you can no longer escape what you truly are. And in that confrontation, something liberating begins to form. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He did not see suffering as a malfunction of the human experience, but as an essential part of it. Pain is not the end of the path. It is often the very beginning of the journey toward individuation. The difficulty is that most people never make it through this stage. They retreat before crossing the inner darkness. They distract themselves, avoid reflection, return to comfort, and remain unchanged beneath the surface. But if you have reached this point, it suggests something different. It suggests readiness. Readiness to go through the inner crossing, no matter how uncomfortable it may become. Because very few people have the courage to begin the process of individuation, and even fewer have the strength to complete it. This path does not offer comfort. It does not provide guarantees. It does not protect the ego. Instead, it slowly dismantles it. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who you truly are. But this also means something more difficult: unlearning everything you thought you were. And that realization can be more painful than rejection from the external world, because you begin to see that much of your identity was constructed for survival rather than truth. You are not your accomplishments. You are not your past wounds. You are not the image you built in order to be accepted, admired, or loved. All of that was adaptation, not essence. Survival strategies, not identity. And survival is not the same as living. Individuation is the movement beyond survival, into authenticity. It is at this stage that the unconscious begins pushing everything suppressed to the surface. Memories, emotions, fears, contradictions, all rising to be acknowledged instead of hidden. This process requires the dissolution of the persona, what Jung described as the social mask, shaped by expectations and collective pressure. In other words, you are asked to let go of the identity you have been presenting to the world. And that can feel like losing yourself before finding yourself. Yet this is exactly where transformation begins. Because in this process, you start becoming unshakable. Not because nothing affects you anymore, but because you are no longer divided inside. You begin to face your internal world directly. Your fears, your anger, your shame, your emotional dependency. And instead of avoiding them, you recognize them, and in that recognition, their control weakens. You no longer need constant validation. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer need to appear invulnerable, because your sense of self is no longer built on external approval. True emotional strength is not a protective shell. It is an integrated center, a stable core formed by accepting every part of yourself, including the parts you once rejected. You may still feel pain, but it does not dismantle you. You may still experience hurt, but it no longer defines you. Because reactivity begins to fade when awareness deepens. You stop reacting automatically and start responding consciously. However, this depth of awareness often comes with a cost, a sense of distance from others. Not because you reject people, but because you are no longer operating from the same level of unconscious patterns. Many people remain on the surface of life, avoiding discomfort and emotional depth. When you begin to move inward, the connection changes. But this separation is not arrogance, it is growth. It is not withdrawal, it is maturation. You are not leaving others behind out of superiority, but because you are no longer able to live within the same illusions you once shared. And this leads to an important realization. True strength is not protection, it is clarity. Because no external force can be fully avoided while you are unconscious of what is happening within you. Words will still hurt. Rejection will still sting. Loss will still affect you. Until awareness enters the equation. Awakening is not a sudden event. It is a continuous choice. A willingness to look inward even when it feels uncomfortable. A willingness to take responsibility for your internal experience instead of projecting it outward. Carl Jung expressed this idea simply. What you resist continues, but what you accept begins to transform. For a long time, you may have resisted fear, rejection, loneliness, and emotional emptiness, trying to avoid them, suppress them, or outgrow them without understanding them. But resistance does not eliminate these states. It intensifies them internally. You may have tried to be strong, to be perfect, to be unaffected, yet ended up feeling exhausted from constant internal struggle. And now something begins to shift. True emotional stability is not emotional hardness. It is clarity of perception. It is not about building armor against life, but about understanding yourself so deeply that life no longer destabilizes you in the same way. When you recognize your emotional patterns, your triggers, your inner wounds, external events lose their absolute power over you. You still feel, but you are no longer consumed. You still experience pain, but you do not lose your center. And that changes your entire relationship with existence. What once destabilized you becomes something you can observe with awareness. Because those who remain on the surface are constantly impacted by every wave of life. But those who go deeper discover a different reality, stillness beneath the turbulence. And that is where real transformation happens. Not in escape, but in depth. Not in avoidance, but in understanding. When you begin to live from this integrated state, where awareness, acceptance, and presence work together, the external world may still move unpredictably, but it no longer finds the same emotional leverage over you. You are no longer easily shaken, not because life has become easier, but because you have become clearer within it.